Well, 8:35. It's 7th of August. Fair season is here, and we actually get a nice morning rolling on here, unless you don't like humidity. I don't. We're 75 degrees in Linneville. Mike Barrett in for his weekly chat. We call it Good Policies with Barrett Insurance. Mike, good morning to you.
Good morning. So you're saying there are people out there that don't like sweat beating off of their forehead just for walking to their car?
Dried myself,
Although it's not that bad this morning, but
dried myself out 4 times. Dried myself off once I got out of the shower this morning. That's how bad it was. And 70s overnight? No way.
Yeah.
Hey, we were listening to the news here, the national news that we have throughout the day here, and they had quite a good bit of rain down in the Mid-Atlantic. And if I remember correctly, there was a city, it was West Virginia, that had a dam, right? And it was actually above flood stage.
Makes me think of the vacation movie. Remember that? When's the damn tour?
No.
What time's the damn tour?
Oh, gosh.
You don't remember that? Sorry. Go ahead.
No, because I'm old enough to remember it.
You should be, yeah.
But anyways, they had a dam that was above flood stage, and they evacuated a city because, God forbid, the thing should break. They said, or they estimated, the city would have been flooded by 17 feet of water in 7 minutes. I think that officially qualifies as a flash flood.
Yeah. Actually, Noah would get a text alert saying that he needs to come and build before that happens.
So we're using this to lead into something most of us aren't thinking about right now. Folks tend to think about flooding in the springtime, Mike.
Yeah. The truth of the matter is that the weather patterns are just so incredibly different in terms, it's really such an elevated occurrence now. You're talking about the lack of humidity over in California, where you got all the dry air and triple-digit temperatures and one of the biggest fires in California history. And then on the other side of the coast, in the Mid-Atlantic, you got all these, cities and towns in Maryland and that area just inundated with water. New Jersey. I mean, some of the footage we've seen is just mind-blowing. So that prompted me to think about something this morning. It's something that people don't think about. Now, if you're buying a home, most commonly, you're going to just think about what's required. All right. So especially if you're getting a mortgage, you're going to, the bank obviously is going to want you to have a homeowner's policy. And in some cases, they'll want a flood policy.
Kind of like car insurance policy, where you're only required to have liability, right?
Right. And then until you get a loan, then they have something more to say about it. But I always tell people, don't buy insurance because of somebody saying you have to. Buy insurance because it makes sense for you. It makes sense for your situation. So let's say you are buying a home and there's been no identifying area of needing flood policy. So you're not in a higher risk flood area. Great story about a business here in Linneville trying to build, but because Linneville has updated zoning for flood mitigation protection, they're running into some stumbling blocks. So flood is a very real threat. There are people who can get a flood knowingly all the time, but what if you just have a stream? What if you are in a village or in a town that has a system that takes the water away that fails, and now we have this incredible storm that comes through, and now you're flooded? When people think of flood, they honestly typically just think of rivers, streams. They think of lakes, ponds. They don't necessarily think about failure of a water system in your community to get the water away. So what happens when you suffer a flood loss and you don't have a flood policy?
You're in trouble.
No, our silence was the answer. Nothing would happen because you just simply wouldn't have coverage for it. If you think about a homeowner policy, groundwater seepage and flood are absolutely excluded on those policies.
Well, business in St. Johnsbury recently had that happen with spring runoff, with water rolling in a rainstorm during spring melt, flooded the building. No flood insurance.
No flood insurance. And so flood through the national program, which is administered by FEMA, it's the National Flood Insurance Program, which is available for purchase in any community that is actively participating with FEMA. So if you're in a non-participating town, what do? Or if you're looking at a FEMA policy and you want to see some other options, what do? There are some private companies out there now, many of them, who have seen all the missteps of the federal government. The federal government can't say no to you. So if you want to get flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, you're going to get it. Now, how much you pay is the difference here, but you're going to get it. Whereas the private companies reserve the right to say, we're not insuring you. You're too high of a risk.
So if somebody lived right on the banks of the Passumpsic River, the Connecticut River, or whatever, and it was, say, 10 to 15 feet away from the river, the water, and in the past there's been a flood,
that can make you ineligible
qualify it
with
as
some
a
of the
risk.
Yeah,
right?
it would qualify it as a risk for FEMA, maybe make you ineligible for a private carrier. But what you want to look at and what you want to have a dialogue about is what is the trigger for a flood loss? What makes it a flood loss? And the amount of land that needs to be inundated and the amount of neighbors that need to be impacted might not make the national program the best option for you, whereas a private insurance carrier may have less to trigger. They may just say, hey, if you have water, it's a flood. So it's worth having that dialogue. But you could live in a house where you go, we're never in a million years going to get a flood. It's just never going to happen. Never say never exists for a reason. That phrase came from people saying never when they should never have said never, never, never.
I'm going to go back to something you said just a little while ago.
Things to think about that.
Okay. Say you don't live in a floodplain. Okay. Let's say you don't. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to catch you off guard or make you misstep or anything here.
Oh, please do. I love it.
But you said that there are other things that will qualify as a flood. Let's use an example that I think I heard you say, a broken water main.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would that, if somebody...
It very, very possibly could fall under a flood. Absolutely. Flood is defined as water inundated in your property. I mean, so, flood doesn't necessarily have to come from a body of water. It could be a created body of water that becomes a problem. Now, when you're talking about a burst pipe or things like that, there may be some triggers of coverage available, or you may have a liability exposure to go back to the community that had that burst pipe. But do you really want to wait for that? So honestly, if you're in St. Johnsbury, or if you're in Lindenville, or if you're in Waterford, or if you're in Barnet, Passumpsic, I believe all those communities are fully participating with a federal program. And I don't care if you think your house is where Noah would build his ark, way up on the mountaintop, you are eligible to get flood insurance. You might be surprised at how affordable and how cheap it is, and going, well, that's not a bad idea, because there was a stream way over there that's not doing anything right now, but all it would take would be one of those 100-year storms, and that could be a world of difference for you. So just a thing to ponder this morning.
Well, where I live, there is a non-year-round residence across 114. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a camp. And there's a brook that comes down off Seneca Mountain.
Okay.
It's a fairly good-sized brook,
mm-hmm.
okay, like a trout brook or something like that.
Sure.
We had a big melt, we had a big rain, and the water came down. They had a tree fall that caused a dam that diverted the water across their lawn, washed out their driveway, washed it down into ours. Now, had that continued on or been a bigger thing, my landlord would have had to have had flood insurance in order for that to have been covered, right? Similar thing?
Right. So remember, though, that insurance does not cover land. So any washed out driveways or anything like that would just simply not be covered whatsoever. But the property impacted would have been. So, yes, your landlord would have needed flood insurance to cover that loss if one had occurred. So Good thing it didn't, right?
Yes.
Good thing it didn't.
Very much so. Because
and
that single wide would have been Noah's Ark. Okay.
And so and that's an interesting quick hit, is that we actually have a mobile home carrier that you can write a policy for as a primary residence or even as a rental that has flood insurance built into it. It's like the only one I'm aware of that does that. It's very unique. So,
right.
Good morning.
So the key is to have that conversation, is what we always mention.
Exactly.
How can they do that with you?
So, Gary knows. He just texted me and said he wants to talk about flood insurance.
Way to go, Gary.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, he lives way up on the hill, so Gary ain't getting it. But no, just kidding. You can give us a call, 748-5224. Visit our website, thebarrettagency.com. Google, Facebook, and YouTube is all Barrett Insurance Agency.
And, of course, Tuesday mornings, 8:35 here in the Magic Studios.
Absolutely.
All right, Mike, you have a good week. We'll see
Stay
you soon.
cool.
Oh, please. I can turn the AC on.
Go get a towel. You need to wipe that bead of sweat off the forehead.
All right, we got Eddie Cito on the way, but first, the original American Idol, Kelly Clarkson.